friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Best Days and Picked for You. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And this is a card that I planned out in a previous video. For me, it was yesterday. For you guys, it was last week. But I did alter that design just slightly, adding in some trees for some scenery. And I'm also going to use the pattern paper that I picked out in that video from the Bunnies and Blooms 6x8 pad from Simple Stories. So I just tucked that under my cardstock panel so that I can pull my color palette from that. I'm coloring with my Copic markers today, and I'm going to start with the girl's skin. I'm using E000, E00, and E11. Starting with that E11 and laying in some shadows up under her hairline and on the left side of her face, also on the lower part of her arms and the top where the sweater is kind of casting a shadow, and then the same on her ankles. I put a little shadow up under her jeans and then down the back of her feet. I blended that out with the E00, and then the E000 is going to be the highlight, and I did do a second layer of all of those to deepen up the saturation and just make it a little bit darker. It also smooths out the blend a bit, and I definitely wanted to do that since this is skin. I wanted it to be nice and smooth. And then I will give her some rosy cheeks using RV10 and RV11. I went with these cool toned pinks to match the pinks in that pattern paper. Then for her hair, I'm going to try a new combo. I don't believe this is one that I've ever tried before, but I just wanted to mix things up a bit. So I'm going to do kind of like a golden blonde, and I'm going with Y21 with E33 and E35. So the way I do hair is different than I color just about everything else. I actually start with my lightest shade and kind of map out where I eventually want my darkest shades to go. That way I can build that up slowly and not worry about being too heavy-handed and forgetting to leave space for the lighter areas. So I just start light, build my way up, and then build my way back down again. So I'm using the E33 next to kind of pull out those shadows a little bit more, making sure that I use the very tip of my marker and light pressure so I get very thin strokes. And the darker I go, the more thin I want those strokes to be. So I just get extra careful with how I'm holding that marker and how much I'm pushing down as I touch the paper. So I moved on to the E35, which is my darkest shade, and I'm just flicking that in a little bit further, adding it from the ends and then also back from behind her head and around the crown of her head as well. So there's some different areas where there'll be some highlights and some lowlights just to give it some extra movement and texture. So once I have the E35 laid in, I worked my way back down using the E33 and now the Y21. Just going back down and kind of filling things in. And then I usually do a second layer on the hair as well, because then I can kind of assess and see where I want to add a little bit more depth, or well, usually I'm just adding extra shading in there, some extra little streaks of those darker shades. And then instead of going all the way back through, I just went straight to the Y21 to blend that out. So I'm really happy with this result, and I think I will save that combo for some blonde hair in the future. I think it turned out really nice and bright and pretty while still looking natural. So I'm moving on to the bicycle, and I decided to pull out the aqua shades from the pattern paper for that. I'm going to use BG11 and BG13. I pulled out the BG10 as well, but I didn't end up using it just because the areas of that bike are so narrow, I didn't have room to squeeze all 3 shades in. And in fact, some of them are so narrow that they only got the BG13. So I'm starting with that BG13 and laying in the shadows where I have room for them. And if the area is too narrow, like I said, I will just fill it in completely with the BG13 because those areas are mostly lower on the bike anyway, and so they wouldn't be getting as much light being reflected off them. So I just went ahead and filled them in with the darkest shade. But for the areas where there was room, I did blend it out with the BG11. And then I'm going to move on to her pants. I'm going to make them jeans, and I'm actually going to pull out the background of that pattern paper with this shade. So I'm going to use a navy blue combo. I'm using B93, B95, B97, and B99. So I started with the B99, put a little shadow under her sweater and on the back of her jeans, the back of the legs, and then I'm blending that out with the B97. Next I'm going to use the B95, and it was so much lighter that at first I thought maybe I'd grabbed the wrong marker, but no, it was the B95. I'll fill in the pant leg that's on the far side with the B95 since that one would be darker, and then blended out the one in front with the B93. And then I'm going to move on to her sweater, and I wanted to do the pale yellow that is in that pattern paper because I wanted something that would be light enough to do a design on top of later on. So I started with Y quadruple 0, Y triple 0, and Y11, and I'm going to let that dry. I did do 2 layers of it. But then I'm going to let that dry and come back and add a pattern over top of that later on. And then I will keep the Y11 and pull in the Y13 to darken up that combo a little bit and add that to the centers of the flowers in the bouquet. For the tires of the bicycle and also the other metallic parts of it, I'm going to use some neutral grays. I'm going to use N3, N5, and N7. That N7 is really dark. If you wanted it to go even darker, you could use the N9, but I felt like it might be a little too jarring with the softer pastel shades that I have going on with the rest of the images. So I decided to soften it a little bit by making the N7 my darkest. And once I had that laid in, I blended that out with the N5. I'm doing the little petals that her feet are resting on, and the seat pad, and all of those other little metal bits I'm going to get colored in. So once the N5 is laid in, I'm going to come in with the N3 for a little bit of a highlight there. And then I'm also going to use that N3 to just color in any little connector pieces, like all of those little rings and things, just so that they're a little bit lighter. For the handlebars and the piece that is holding the basket onto the front of the bike, I did go back to all 3 of the darkest shades, so the N7 and the N5 and a little of the N3. So for the pattern on her sweater, I thought it might be pretty to add some purple flowers, and I ended up going with V91, V93, and V95. I don't think I actually used the V93 for the flowers though. I started with the V91 and just added in some larger oval shapes. And then I'm taking that V95 and adding in a few little swirls to make them look like the petals of a flower, maybe a rose. And I'm going to let that dry and come back in a little bit with a darker shade. But I'm going to give her a headband to match. So for this one, I wanted to use all 3 shades. Started with the V95, but then when I pulled in the V93, I realized that that marker was completely dry. And when your markers go dry, they get kind of sticky. and it just didn't blend very well at all. So I decided to add in the V99 just to give a little extra depth, and I'm going to add that to my flowers as well. Again, just using the very tip of that marker to do that. Now, at first, when I did this, I did not like it at all. I didn't think it looked very good. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to scrap this image. But I think in the end, I did save it. I think it came all together once I got the other colors added in. So wait and see what you think there. I colored her shoes to match, and then I decided to add in some leaves next to the flowers on her sweater using YG17. So for those, I'm just drawing in like tiny little almond shapes, and I did 2 leaves next to each flower and then added in a few on the opposite sleeve as well. I did also throw in some of that YG17 on a few of the leaves in the bouquet, and then I blended that out with the YG13. And then for the line down the center of the leaves on the sweater, I wanted something a little bit darker, so I went with G46. And then I added in G40 and G43 for that combo and colored in the rest of the leaves in the bouquet, although in the end they didn't look that much different than the first combo. So if I did it again, I would probably pick a slightly more bright green combo for the second batch of leaves. I'm going to go back to my pinks. I'm going to use that RV10 and RV11 that I used on her rosy cheeks and add in the RV00. I'm going to take the RV11 first and just add like some little polka dots in amongst the roses just to bring a little bit of a brightness to that sweater. And then I'm going to use all 3 of these shades to color in the balloon. So I'm starting with the RV11 first on that, and then I'll pull that out with the RV10, kind of working in a circular motion there to make the middle part of that balloon look really transparent, filling that in with the RV10. And then I'll also pick a couple of the flowers from the bouquet to also be pink. So I just used the RV11 and RV10 on those as well, and did go back in with a little extra of that RV11 to darken it up. I also went back over the polka dots with the RV11, but I decided to also pull in the RV13 and just go over those one more time to brighten them up on the sweater. And then I wanted to color the other flowers in the bouquet purple, but I didn't want to use the same purples as the sweater. So I went with V12, V15, and V17. There actually are 2 purples in that pattern paper. There's one that's a bit more pale, and then there's the tiny little flowers that were a little bit darker. So that's kind of where I pulled from there. And then I also used the purples on the dog's collar. For the baskets on the front and the back of the bicycle, I wanted to do almost like a white wicker. So I use E40, E41, and E42 just to give a little bit of shading to that. Really quick and easy. And then for the dog, I decided to do some light brown shades, and then I'm going to add some more detail to him in a minute as well. So I started with E50 and E51 and just kind of colored him in completely with those, adding the E51 for the shadows, and then just kind of flicked that color out with the E50 to blend that really nice and softly. And then I'm going to darken that combo up, and I pulled out the E53 and the E55 at first and started to color in one of his ears with that, but I realized it wasn't going to be dark enough for what I wanted, so I also pulled out the E57, and I'm going to color in one of his ears with that shade, and then give him a little ring around his eye, and then a patch on his back and on his hind leg, and then a little tiny patch on one of his front legs. So once I have that kind of laid in, I'll blend that out with the E55. Just kind of softening the edge of that, making sure that it's not too harsh. And then I will come in with the E53 and finish that off. So that'll be the highlight for this darker combo. So I finished his ear. I also colored in the rest of the patch around his eye. And then the other little patches on his body are also going to get that E53, which will just help them blend a little bit nicer into his body. And then once I was done with him, I decided to do the cat kind of similarly. So I'm going to go back to my E51 and just add a little bit of shading on the edges and then flick out with the E50. I left the lower part of his face white. And then I'm going to come in with the E57 and just give him like a big patch over one side of his face. So I blended that out with the E55 and then the E53, just like the dog. And that's going to finish him off, but I will give them some rosy cheeks as well, just to make them look a little bit more cheerful. So I'll go back to my RV10 and RV11. I also colored the inside of the cat's ears with the RV10, I believe, and his nose with the RV11. Those shades were looking a little bit too dark on those lighter critters though, so I did blend it out with the RV00. And then I am going to move on to my little stand of trees. I decided to go back to the E40s since I had used those on the basket. And I'm going to use the E42 on the left side of each of those trees. Just drawing a line up the side really quick. And then I'm going to blend that out. Also adding in the little details of the lines that are drawn on there to just signify the rougher texture of the bark. I'll blend out that E42 with the E41, still just sticking really close to that left side of the tree, and then a little bit of the E40 as well, and I'll leave the right side of the tree just white. And then for the leaves and the grasses, I'm going to use YG11, YG13, and YG17, and just kind of blend those out the same way that I did the leaves in the bouquet, although for those I hadn't pulled in the YG11, but I just wanted them to be a little bit lighter and brighter. And then for the grass down at the bottom, I just did a line of that YG17 and then blended up with the YG13 and a little of the YG11 thrown in there as well. And then I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just got that going. Mine's pretty old, so it always has to be kind of scribbled off to the side to get it flowing nicely. But you want it to be kind of wet, otherwise it doesn't work quite the same. But it'll kind of give you a little bit of a raised detail on the eyes and just make them brighter. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. So when I was planning out that card in the previous video, I was between two dies to use for my focal panel. I ended up deciding to go with the Nesting Decal A2s. I also thought I was going to use the Hill and Dale dies for the grass, but I ended up using the Grassy Knoll instead. So I did kind of shift slightly there from the original design. And I am going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil to create a little sky. And I am starting with some Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink, and then I'm going to add in a touch of Salvage Patina, and that is because in that pattern paper there was some aqua, but there was also a lighter blue. And so I wanted to kind of pull in both of those shades in the focal panel of this card. So I'm just going to turn that stencil and work my way down, always starting with the tumbled glass and then adding in a touch of the Salvage Patina in like the lower little dips of the cloud. And I will do 3 of those cloud formations because that's about all I need. The rest will be covered up by the grassy hill. But then once I get to the bottom, I'm just going to blend on a little extra color down there, just so it's not so stark white. If a little bit of that sky ends up showing, it'll all have that kind of hazy, dreamy look like the rest of that sky does. Once I'm done with that focal panel, I'll set that aside and move on to my grassy hillside. And for that one, I'm going to use Twisted Citron first, right up top where the grasses are, blending that down about halfway down the panel. And then I'll bring in Mowed Lawn to darken that up. And the Mowed Lawn I wanted to add quite a bit of because the green in the pattern paper is darker than that Twisted Citron. So I wanted it to reflect that, but I just wanted that Twisted Citron in there to add a little bit of lightness. So I just went back to the first blending tool to smooth out that transition between the two. And then I'm going to pop that cloudy background into my Misty so I can stamp out my sentiment, which is from Birthday Script. And I'm doing the one that says Birthday Hugs. And that one's stamped down perfectly the first time. So I'm just going to set that aside to dry. And I'll pop my card base in my Misty. I'm using some Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers cardstock and bubblegum ink. And I did the little corgi and a flower from the Best Days stamp set. And then the sentiment is also from the Birthday Script. So now I'm going to go back to that Bunnies and Bloom pattern paper and look through my scraps and try to find something that would work as a contrasting print. I decided to go with this pink print with the little dash lines that almost look like raindrops or something like that. And then I just trim those down with my paper trimmer. And I'm going to add that to the card front. So the card is a standard A2 size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I'm going to glue the pink pattern across the center just to break up some of that smaller print a little bit. I'll make sure that those are on there nice and straight. And then I have added some foam tape to the back of my focal panel. So I'm going to pop that up in the center, just making sure that that is straight as well. And then press that down. And then I'll grab that grassy hillside and glue that down right over top. And I did make sure that the deckled edges would match up. You know, if you would do your clouds, you could do your clouds upside down and then the grass would look kind of funny. So you do have to make sure it's going the right direction. Then I'm going to bring in my images and add my tree stand over on the left side there, going up to the top edge of that focal panel. And then I will add my girl on her bicycle. So I'm just being really careful to add glue all the way around the tires and in between the spokes and everywhere, so that will be really well adhered. But before I push her down completely, I want to make sure that she is positioned correctly so that that balloon has room to kind of stretch out behind her as it's kind of blowing in the wind as she pedals, you know, across this landscape. So I'm going to tuck that balloon back behind her, and then I can press her down firmly so that she can be adhered to that focal panel. Next, I'm going to take the kitty and add that to the front basket so she can be peeking over the edge there. And then I'll take the floral bouquet and add that to the back basket. And then I have the little dog, and I wanted him to kind of be running along beside, a little bit behind her. So I'll add that down at the bottom left. But then I was thinking as I was looking at this card that there was too much empty space over there on the right hand side. It needed something. So I went back to the Picked For You stamp set and saw these bluebells, and I colored those in, and I'm just going to tuck them in over on that far right side. I decided to put them back behind the grasses, and that filled in that space so much nicer. I really am glad that I decided to add those. Of course, this card needed a little bit of sparkle, so I added my favorite Stardust stickles. I put some on the balloon and the centers of the flowers in the bouquet, and also on the bluebells. And that is going to finish up this card. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this one, seeing how this idea came from not even having an idea in that first video to a completed card. If you missed that first video, do go and check that out, because I think it might be really helpful for you to see how I come up with a card concept. If you did enjoy it, please go ahead and hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. Make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on if you'd like to be alerted whenever I post a new video. Any of the products that I used today will be linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.